Let me tell you how this ends first, because I think you deserve to know what you are staying for. The man who decided I was a threat to his relationship ended up losing everything: his marriage, his reputation, and eventually the job he had used to make himself feel superior to people like me. And the best friend who chose him over me? She called me from the floor of her apartment 6 months after her wedding, asking if I could come over. I went, because that is who I am. But I am getting ahead of myself, so let me take you back to the beginning. Chloe and I met when we were 11 years old. First day of 6th grade, same homeroom. She sat next to me because it was the only empty seat. By lunch, we were already finishing each other's sentences. By Friday, we were inseparable. By the end of that school year, I could not remember what my life had looked like before her. For 11 years, she was my person. Capital P, no question mark. She was there the night my parents sat me down and told me they were getting divorced. I drove 4 hours to be with her when her grandmother passed away. We chose colleges in the same city on purpose. We did not even discuss it, we just assumed that was what we were doing. Because neither of us could imagine it any other way. We got our first apartments 3 blocks from each other. We had a standing dinner every few weeks. Just the two of us. No phone on the table. No cancellations unless someone was genuinely sick. When people met us, they assumed we were sisters. I tell you all of this so you understand exactly what was at stake when Marcus decided I was a problem. He came into Chloe's life about 2.5 years before the wedding. I remember her calling me the night they met. She was giddy in a way I had not heard in years, talking too fast, laughing at things that were not even that funny. I was genuinely happy for her. I wanted this for her more than she knew. But from the very first time I met Marcus in person, something felt wrong. I want to be precise about this because it matters. There was nothing dramatic, no single moment I could point to. He was charming, polished, and said all the right things. He remembered details from previous conversations. He complimented me in ways that felt just slightly too considered, like he had calculated exactly how much warmth was appropriate and dispensed it carefully. It was his eyes that gave him away. When Chloe was not looking at him, his eyes went somewhere else entirely, flat and watchful and measuring, like a man who was always doing math in his head. I told myself I was being overprotective. I told myself I was projecting. I worked actively against my own instincts. Because I love, Chloe and I wanted to be supportive. That instinct I ignored knew exactly what it was talking about. The changes started small, the way the most dangerous changes always do. Our standing dinners went from every few weeks to every couple of months. Her texts took longer to be returned. When we did see each other, there was a new quality to her attention, slightly divided and slightly elsewhere. Like part of her was always listening for something in the distance. The first time she canceled plans and mentioned Marcus in the explanation, I let it go. Relationships need adjustment, of course they do, and I understood that. The second time, I let it go too. By the 5th or 6th time, I had stopped counting, and I understood that something had shifted in a way that was not just adjustment, but I still did not name it, not even to myself, because naming it would have meant accepting something I was not ready to accept. What I did not know then, and only found out much later, was that Marcus had been telling Chloe things about me for months, that I was too intense, that our friendship was codependent, that she would never fully grow as a person if she kept centering a friendship that was essentially a comfort habit, rather than something that served her future. He was patient about it, methodical, but the way you are when you are not trying to win an argument, but trying to change someone's mind so thoroughly that they forget there was ever another point of view. When Marcus proposed, Chloe called me immediately. She was crying happy tears, laughing through them, barely coherent, and I cried with her through the phone. I told her she deserved every bit of this happiness, and I meant it completely. She asked me to be her maid of honor that same night. There is no one else it could be, she said. You know that." I said yes before she finished the sentence. For 3 months after that, I threw myself into that role like it was a second job. Venue research for the bachelorette trip, spreadsheets for the bridal shower, 4 dress appointments where I sat in those little chairs with champagne and gave her my honest opinion. Every single time. Even when my honest opinion was not what she was hoping to hear. Hours spent on floral arrangements, cake samples, and seating charts. I loved every minute of it, not because of the wedding itself, but because having a purpose in her life again felt like having her back. Like the distance of the last 2 years was finally closing, and we were 11-year-old girls planning things together, excited about everything ahead of us. I should have noticed that every single time Marcus walked into a room where Chloe and I were laughing together. The temperature in his face dropped 3 degrees. I should have noticed the way he would find small reasons to interrupt those moments, a question about dinner, a reminder about something they needed to do, anything to break the current between us. I noticed. I just refused to believe what I was seeing. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening. I was making dinner, the stove on, half present in that comfortable end-of-day way, when her name appeared on my phone. I answered with a smile she could not see, the automatic smile that 11 years of love builds into your muscles. Her voice was wronged from the first word, careful and over-controlled in the way that people are when they have rehearsed something they do not fully believe, when they are delivering someone else's script in their own voice. She said she needed to talk to me about the wedding. I turned the stove off. She used phrases like simplify the bridal party and scale back, and it has just been really overwhelming. She never once said Marcus's name, not once, as if leaving him out of the sentence made him less responsible for what was in it. I asked her directly, "Is this because of Marcus?" A pause. Just long enough to answer the question without words. "He just feels like sometimes our friendship does not leave room for him," she said finally. "Like there's a dynamic between us that is a little exclusive." I stood in my kitchen and looked at the stove I had just turned off and tried to locate myself inside when I was hearing my best friend of 11 years. 11 years of driving 4 hours and standing in homeroom and choosing the same, sitting across from each other every few weeks with our phones face down on the table as Turden is incident-winnered calling next lies, being told I did not leave enough room. "Chloe," I said, very quietly, "do you hear what you're saying to me?" She said she was sorry. She said she hoped we could still be close. She said she hoped I would come to the wedding as a guest. I said I needed to go. I hung up. And then I sat down on my kitchen floor, still in my work clothes, and I cried in a way I had not cried since I was a child. The ugly, gasping, uncontrollable kind that does not care what you look like or who can hear you. The kind that comes from somewhere below your chest and takes everything with it on the way out. I cried for a long time, and then I got up, washed my face, stood at the counter and looked at my own reflection in the dark window above the sink, and I made a decision that would change the next 2 years of my life completely. I was done waiting to be chosen. I was done making myself smaller so that insecure people could feel larger. I was done treating my own ambitions like something I needed permission to pursue. I had an idea I had been sitting on for 3 years. I had skills I had been undercharging for 6. I had a life that belonged to me, and I had been living it like it was on loan from other people. That was over. Starting that night, I was going to build something no one could take from me. The business idea had been living in the back of my mind for almost 3 years at that point. I worked in corporate event planning and had for 6 years. And I was genuinely good at it in a way I was always too careful to say out loud. I had a talent for the details other people overlooked, for anticipating problems before they became visible, for making clients feel so thoroughly taken care of that they stopped worrying and started enjoying. My clients loved me. My boss knew exactly how valuable I was and paid me like I was replaceable. because he understood that I did not yet believe otherwise. I had been telling myself I would start my own company someday. Someday when I had more savings. Someday when the timing felt right. Someday when I felt ready enough to deserve it. That Tuesday night, sitting on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, I finally understood what someday actually was. Someday was just fear dressed up in a calendar. I spent that entire weekend building a real business plan, not a daydream, not a vision board, an actual working document. Startup costs broken down line by line. Revenue projections across 3 different scenarios. Target client profile, pricing structure. I reached out to a woman I had met briefly at an industry event too, years earlier, who had started her own firm. I asked if I could buy her coffee and ask some questions. She said yes without hesitation. Over 2 hours at a corner table, she gave me more usable, practical, honest information than I had gathered in years of thinking about it on my own. I registered the business 6 weeks later, named it after the street I grew up on. Something personal, something that felt entirely mine. My first client came through a former colleague who had heard I was going independent. It was a small corporate dinner. 40 people, a modest budget, nothing glamorous on paper. I treated it like it was a gala for 500. Every detail was considered, every vendor was briefed thoroughly and followed up with twice. Every contingency was planned for before it could become a problem. The client was stunned. They sent me 2 referrals before the event invoice was even paid. By month 3, I had 5 active clients. By month 5, I needed a part-time assistant because I could not manage the volume alone anymore. By month 8, I had moved out of my kitchen table setup and into an actual office space downtown. Small but real, with my company name printed on the door. I was working harder than I ever had in my life. I was also sleeping better than I had in years. And somewhere, in the middle of all of it, quietly and without ceremony, I stopped checking Chloe's social media, not out of anger or bitterness, simply because my own life had finally become interesting enough to deserve my full attention. 7 months after I registered the business, I landed a contract with a mid-sized financial firm to manage their annual client appreciation event. 200 guests, a significant budget, and the kind of high expectations that separate serious clients from casual ones. I put together the most detailed proposal I had ever written. I walked into that pitch meeting dressed like I had already won the contract, and I delivered a presentation I had rehearsed until it lived in my body rather than just my memory. I got the contract. What I did not know when I signed the paperwork was that this firm's CEO, a man named Richard, who was sharp and direct and exactly the kind of clients you want when you are trying to build a reputation, was Marcus's direct supervisor at work. I only found this out during our first planning meeting, when Richard's assistant mentioned casually, while going over the guest list, that Marcus and his wife would be attending. I wrote it down. I said nothing. I kept working. The event was in February. I ran it without a single visible problem. There were 2 invisible ones that I solved in real time, quietly, the way professionals do. The way you learn to when you have spent enough years caring more about the outcome than the credit. At the end of the night, Richard found me across the room and walked over with the specific expression of someone who is hard to impress and has just been surprised. He told me it was the best event his firm had hosted in a decade. He asked for my card. He said he wanted to discuss a longer arrangement. Then, almost as an aside, like he was mentioning the weather, he said he understood I knew Marcus and his wife. I said yes, that we had been friends for a long time. He nodded slowly and said, "Marcus mentioned you once, actually. Said something dismissive about your business." I'm glad I did not take his word for it. I thanked him and moved on to the next conversation. But I held those words somewhere quiet and safe inside me, because they confirmed something I had suspected from the beginning. Marcus had always known exactly who I was. He had not pushed me out of Chloe's life because I was nothing. He had pushed me out because he understood, on some level, what I was capable of, and he needed me gone before I became proof that his version of me was wrong. The longer arrangement with Richard's firm came through in March. Recurring work, consistent revenue, and introductions into a professional network that had previously been completely out of my reach. I brought on 2 more staff members. We managed events across 4 cities that year. We were profitable in a way that still catches me off guard sometimes when I look at the numbers. Like, I'm waiting for someone to tell me there has been a mistake. There was no mistake. I had just finally stopped apologizing for being good at what I do. In April, Chloe called. Her name appeared on my phone on a Thursday morning while I was reviewing vendor quotes, and I stared at it for a moment before I answered. She was crying before she finished saying my name. It took several minutes to understand what she was telling me through the tears. The short version was this: Marcus had been having an affair, not a brief one and not a mistake. A sustained and deliberate relationship with a woman from his office that had apparently been ongoing before the wedding and had continued steadily after it. They had been married for 6 months. Chloe found out through a mutual friend who had seen them together and could not stay quiet about it any longer. She said she did not know who else to call. She said she was sorry for everything. She said she had spent months slowly realizing that she had allowed someone to dismantle every relationship that actually mattered to her, that she had let fear of losing him override her own instincts about what was real and what was not, and that she had been too ashamed to admit it to herself until she had no choice. I listened to all of it without interrupting. I did not say I told you so, not because I was being strategic or noble, but because it was not what she needed and it was not what I wanted to say. When she finished, I asked where she was. She told me. I got in my car. We sat in her apartment for 4 hours. I made tea. I listened. I helped her think through the immediate practical steps, what she needed to do, who she needed to call, how to protect herself going forward. I was not there as someone who had been wronged. I was there as a friend, because that is what I have always been, and that is not something other. People's choices get to change about me, but before I left, I said one thing I needed her to hear, and I needed to say. I told her that what had happened between us was not small, that she had let someone take something from me that I could not fully get back, that I forgave her genuinely and completely, but that I needed her to actually sit with how it had happened, not for my sake, for hers. Because if she did not understand the pattern, it would find her again in a different face. She said she knew. She said sorry in a way that used all of her. Marcus was let go from the firm 4 months later. I do not know every detail, and I do not need to. What I know is that Richard, at an industry event last spring, mentioned briefly that certain things about Marcus's character had become difficult to ignore. Once people started paying closer attention, he had spent 2 years being dismissive about a woman he found threatening. That woman now manages events for the company he used to work for. I will not pretend that does not feel like something. It does, but that is not the point of this story. Here is what I actually want you to take away from everything I have just told you. And I need you to hear this part clearly because it is the only part that genuinely matters. The night Chloe called me and told me I did not leave enough room, I could have fallen apart completely. I could have spent weeks trying to win my way back in, adjusting myself, making myself quieter and smaller and easier, fitting whatever shape Marcus had decided was acceptable for a woman in Chloe's life. I could have let his version of me become the version I believed. I could have treated his opinion like a verdict. Many people would have. I understand why. When someone you love chooses another person over you, there is a voice that immediately starts asking what you did wrong, what you should have been differently, how you could have made yourself more acceptable. That voice is not your conscience. That voice is just old pain, looking for somewhere familiar to live. Instead, I sat on a kitchen floor and I cried until it was out of me. And then I got up and I built something real. I did not wait until the fear was gone. I did not wait until I felt ready or until the timing was perfect or until someone gave me permission. I made the decision and I moved while I was still afraid, because I had finally understood that the fear does not leave before the action. The action has to come first, and the fear has to follow behind you rather than lead. Our friendship today is quieter than it was before all of this. More careful, different in ways I'm still learning to name and probably will be for a long time. But it exists. We are still figuring out what it looks like now. And I think the fact that we are still figuring it out, it all means something worth honoring. What I know is that I would not trade a single difficult thing that happened in these 2 years. Not the phone call, not the kitchen floor, not the grief of losing my place in her life, because every single one of those things was a door. And I was always the kind of person who walks through doors, even the ones that were closed on purpose to keep me out. You do not need to be chosen by the people who cannot see you clearly. You only need to choose yourself, and you need to do it before you feel ready, before it feels safe, before anyone has validated the decision. Build the thing, take the meeting, send the email, walk through the door. What is on the other side was always meant for you. They just forgot that when they tried to decide your limits, the door they closed behind me did not lead to nothing.
It led here.
And here, it turns out, is exactly where I was supposed to be all along.